Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit, and welcome to this episode. My guest today is Sabrina Monarch, who is an evolutionary astrologer, and Sabrina is also one of my mentors, and we talked about money and the fixed signs. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek title because we ended up talking way more than just about money. We talk about a lot of the dimensions that can be brought up when we're thinking about money, when we're interacting with money. And the fixed signs, which in astrology are Leo, Aquarius, Scorpio, and Taurus, are points of contemplation that Sabrina has been reflecting on for a number of years now. I've heard her talk about this at least for the past 3 years. And something that I've noticed each time I get a chance to talk to Sabrina about this is that there is a deeper level of awareness and consciousness that opens up. And this particular conversation feels like such a frequency transmission. And there's such a powerful and moving quality to this depth of reflection that Sabrina brings to the table with regards to this topic. So it's a very, very powerful conversation. I invite you to really open your heart and open your mind and feel into all of the ways that this can be resonant for you and relevant for you in this particular point in your journey. If you resonate with Sabrina, her voice, her presence, know that she is teaching the next round of her signature course, Evolutionary Astrology Intensive, which begins on Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024. And if you'd like to join, there is an application process and it's due by Friday, March 29, 2024. I was an alumni of this program back in 2020, and it's a program I cannot recommend highly enough. It really kind of brought my astrology practice to the next level. Prior to this course, I was really, learning astrology on my own. I was reading a bunch of books. I was visiting cafe astrology quite frequently. I think we all can relate to that. And this course really helped me solidify my understanding, synthesize my knowledge, and prepared me to eventually be able to do readings and to create a lot of my own astrological contemplations and teachings. And so if that's something that's interesting to you, and if you feel a resonance with Sabrina's presence, I highly would recommend this program. Okay, so here's my conversation with Sabrina Monarch on money and the fixed signs. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Sabrina. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
It's always such a joy to record something with you and to share space with you, because I feel like when I think about you, you have this access to this really abundant flow of like wisdom and knowledge and insight. And that's something that I've always deeply admired it in your being. And I think over the years of learning from you, getting to know you, I really see your devotion to being with the planets and being an astrologer and, doing your, at this point, mostly weekly forecasts, right? For like many, many years. And I feel like it really shows because I imagine that you're one of those people who can just like wake up and start talking about astrology.
Pretty much. And a lot of what you're speaking to, I feel like, is this resonance that we share of
Mm,
being Mercury and Pisces people and just being like lyrical mystics.
yeah.
Yeah, who are, relational in terms of our practice.
hmm Totally. Totally. So you've been on my podcast before, but just in case whoever is listening doesn't know you or isn't familiar with your work, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
I would love to. Hey, everyone. I'm Sabrina Monarch, and I am really happy to be here on this podcast. Jonathan and I go like way back now, like kind of around
hmm
the pandemic. I've been practicing astrology professionally since 2015, though I started as a kid, just in terms of my relationship with astrology. I have a podcast, Magic of the Spheres, and I've really been sourced or rooted in evolutionary astrology. And I feel like I have a really deep relationship with it, not just in terms of my professional life with it and teaching it and forecasting and all of that, but also just personally, the kind of like intimacy that I have with my own personal evolution and how that really informs my transmissions all of the time.
hmm
So I love approaching astrology from a very personal, psychological, soul oriented approach.
hmm Beautiful. I should also mention that you are the author of two incredible novels. One is um, Garden of the Sleeping Hammers, right? And the other one's Hungry Ghosts of Paradise. Is that right?
Yeah, they have like weird names, right?
I
So
like them. They're very Mercury and Pisces. Yeah.
totally. Yeah. The Hungry Ghosts of Paradise is the more recent one, and it's an audio
hmm
novella that's on my podcast. There's a Spotify playlist I can send you to
Mm,
link, just
beautiful.
where it's all organized.
Yeah.
But I was writing and sharing it as I went, which was really amazing. Like, I had no problem with that. If I missed something, I just wrote a flashback scene and kept going. But it was really, it took the burden off because I think
hmm
that sometimes producing like a big work is really intense.
Yeah.
And for that particular novel, I needed some levity in terms of the style of it.
hmm
But then, because it is a really deep and like kind of tragic novel, and there was a lot that I was alchemizing to write it. And then The Garden of Sleeping Hammers, I think I finished it around 2015. It was before I started my astrology practice.
Mm,
And that one is like a really lightly fictionalized uh, version of kind of my origin story with astrology.
yeah. Beautiful. Um, I really love both those works, and I feel like um, something that I've always admired about you is your ability to allow your astrological mastery to also be applied into your artistic life. And there's something about, to me, those novels feel like estuaries. You know, there's kind of a confluence of like the mundane and the mystical water. Not that they were ever really separate, but yeah, there's such a beautiful meeting of those two worlds in those novels.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan.
hmm So, something I want to talk about with you today, and this is interesting because I've had this in the back burner for a while now. Like, I think when Saturn entered Pisces, I started thinking about it and started to desire to conceptualize it as a series, which I'm still not sure if it's going to be a series, but essentially, I just noticed around that time. So I think Saturn entered Pisces around March 7, 2023, right? And I started noticing the distortions that we have on a spiritual, energetic, psychological level with regards to money and our creativity. And specifically, what I was becoming aware of was so at that time, my grandpa passed away. So I went back home and I was talking to a bunch of people that I haven't really connected with for the past few years. And I started noticing this gap between my community members back home versus in the US, where I've basically in the US lost touch with a lot of my local friends because people have either moved out of New York or um, moved on to other things. And most of my friends at that time were online, including you. And I was seeing this evidence of people making good living, not just in terms of how much money they were making, but in terms of how satisfied and connected to their life purpose their money making endeavors and enterprises seem to be. And so what I also noticed as a pattern was none of my friends who were online and doing this work and making good living out of it were doing it the same way. Everybody was doing it in such different ways, right? Which is such a contrast to, I came from my dad worked at a bank, right? And so everybody kind of had that job and had to essentially climb the ladder in the same way. And so, yeah, I had this fleeting thought that I wanted to do this series on like money and soul and life purpose. And I know that you have talked about it um, when I was in Meteorite, right? We had talked about this a little bit. So I knew you would be someone I would want to talk to. And here we are. So I know that you've been thinking about the fixed signs for some time. And I know that we're probably going to kind of bring that all together.
Yeah, what I hear in those reflections is that, like being an entrepreneur is such a different, it's like Wild West vibes with money because you don't have a guaranteed paycheck, but you
Mm,
also don't have a cap on how much you can make.
yeah.
So you get to experience a reflection from life in terms of ebbs and flows of money directly related to your offering versus when you have a paycheck. It's like you have the stability, you don't have to worry about that, but you don't necessarily get to like make more or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that um, there's a lot of, this would tie into the fixed signs, like maybe the Aquarius, like, the fixed get stuck and they have a lot of high, compact, powerful energy.
Mm-hmm.
And people have ideas about money and traumas about money and traumas around resource that are kind of energetically stubborn, and like the process of alchemizing those, like it's even just this sentiment that people sometimes have of like, if I start a business or charge for what I love doing, that it's going to taint my love for my
Mm,
art.
yeah.
And I've found that combining astrology and money has only made me enjoy resources more and enjoy
Mm-hmm.
astrology more. Like
Mm-hmm.
it can spiral in like a loving way too. And there's some deconditioned ways to think about resource and energy exchange. And there's a whole web of things to get free of because it's a really loaded subject.
For sure. Yeah. I think that's such a great example of one of the most prevalent thought forms, right? And I think it also drives this um like starving artist archetype, right? There's something kind of that I think we are really inheriting from um Western romantic era poets and artists, right? Where it's like, oh, look at how broke Schubert was, or like whoever, right? When they were creating this gorgeous masterpiece and like they couldn't even pay for heating in their apartment in like 19th century Vienna. Hmm.
Yeah, and it's funny too because I think those images call to mind a person that's actually having a very rich experience. And I use that
Mm-hmm.
word intentionally, where it's like they are rich in experience, they're rich in creativity. And then there's this othering of money inside of that. And that's kind of where the issue lies to me. Because I think
Mm,
also when it comes to abundance work or like having a better relationship with money, we do have to consider how we're being resourced and where we feel taxed. And like
mm.
noticing that at energetic levels and not just as literal, like money coming and leaving a bank account
Yeah,
figures.
yeah, exactly. Um, I'm curious to maybe have you talk a little bit about your experience with deepening into your relationship with money, because from my understanding, or maybe my observation, maybe you started out, really out of sheer love for astrology and just wanting to be able to do it and wanting to be able to share it with people and share the magic that it's brought into your life. But in deepening into that craft and that devotion, it seems to me like there is a piece around this necessity, right, of being able to make a good living out of it that kind of came up. And yeah, I wonder how you kind of move through that. What has been your story and your journey around that?
Yeah. There's so many things coming to mind. I'm like,
Mm.
this is really, it's like I'm at Aries sun in the second house. So it's really core to everything that I can like think about in my life. And I
Mm.
was getting a really strong image of being a kid, or like even maybe more so a teenager, and looking through magazines and feeling this like these pangs of like grief that like I cannot afford the things in this magazine. And even if I say like I could look around and be like, well, let me find a job and like make minimum wage, I can't afford the things in this magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that sense of like early on, I kind of felt like I want to figure out how to make money. Like it just, I could feel the purity of that. And like I didn't have a lot of shame around that desire to have nice things. I didn't
Mm.
think it meant anything about me. I just like felt the desire and felt the disempowerment of not being able to do it. Um, and then when it came to astrology, I had had an experience when I was 21 of like a big spiritual awakening and intense experience, um, kind of like a spiritual crisis. And after that, I just kind of felt like I didn't want to have a normal life or get a
Mm.
job. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that I'll have a mental breakdown on the spot if I get a job. I need to be an entrepreneur. I need to make my own money. Like, I just really felt that. And so I did have family support. I think that's worth saying. Sometimes
Mm.
that can make people like overlook my message entirely of like, oh, whatever, she
Mm.
had, like that kind of thing. But I was supported. I did have like a safety net.
Yeah.
And I was very kind of in like a couple year period of like knowing that someday I was gonna have to like be independent financially. And I was on the clock of like, can I become financially successful? Um, Work with this resource that I've been given to invest in my path in various ways. And so I would have this experience of different months where I only had enough to buy basic necessities, and like an investment would be like a chocolate, and I would like really meditate on like enjoying it fully, and I would just be in like I did money experiments at that time where I would have all the necessities that I needed in my house,
Mm.
and then I would just spend all my money rapidly on my life purpose. That was like what I had to do. And then I would have zero money in my bank account. And this interesting spiritual twilight would happen where I was at a park, I was a nanny, and this woman yelled across the park at me and was like, hey, and like offered me a job to do editing work. And I was
Whoa.
like, yeah, or like I was at Trader Joe's and the person in front of me, I had no money left in my bank account and I just had stuff on the conveyor belt, like insanity. And the person in front of me, not even knowing that, just looked at me and was like, I'll pay for her groceries. So, and that during that time, I was in a spiritual experiment where I was like, God is my employer. I do not work
Mm.
for a person,
Mm-hmm.
but God is my employer. And I would just like spend my money on my life purpose and wait for God to resource me.
Wow.
And so I did that kind of thing. And then had these other experiences where, like that was the level of the game I was playing.
Mm.
And I'm talking about games and money kind of intentionally because money can be about survival and necessities. It can also be fun and games and play. And
Mm.
if, a lot of people are too, like, they get contracted around the play side of money and don't want to take the risk or the gamble or whatnot. But if you start to play with money, this whole other experience opens up. So
Mm.
then what happened is I was in grad school and I would get like student loans, and I had no idea that the student loans included just like cash to live off of. which was amazing. It would be like suddenly $15,000 or something of just money. And I was
Right.
like, I've never just received $15,000, you know? And
Mm,
for me, it's like I would spend it, I would invest it in things like business coaching. You know, I was already practicing astrology by then. And so I just would have different experiences of basically like knowing what I really felt I needed or wanted as an experience that was going to up level me and finding out how to make it work in terms of having the resources
mm,
and playing the game at times. There's been a
mhm,
few different times I've been in like very mild credit card debt, like nothing extravagant. But I just think having this kind of, for me, like knowing that I have something to offer, knowing that I think what I have to offer is amazing and that I just
mm,
need to figure out how to market better, like reach the right people. I was like, I'm going to bet on myself and like let myself invest in what I need to invest in.
mm,
Um, so that was kind of how I approached the money side with astrology. And I will say, like, another part of it was just having this one period where I was like, I've been doing this for years and I'm not making salary. Like I looked at my numbers and I was like, I'm not making a salary. And I like wrote my mailing list about it. Like, I'm running a Kickstarter. I would like your help funding the year ahead. In all honesty, like I am not making like a salary from this, but I'm working full
mm,
time.
mhm,
And then I did the Kickstarter 2 years in a row. I learned some I like advanced as a coach and I learned how to create more lucrative offerings, and also offer things that were worth more. And
mm,
then I became able to make a good living. And it
mhm,
was just like it was a lot of play and experimentation, a lot of working with people and mentors. And yeah, this investment part
mhm,
that really
mhm.
went into it.
Yeah. Ooh. I really love this because it's pinging so much within me. I think the first thing I want to reflect to you is I'm hearing a really beautiful alchemy between taking something seriously, but also willing to be playful around it. And that willingness to be playful as a pathway towards deepening, right? Like willingness to be playful, not to be uh, delusional or to be careless, but rather it actually makes more space for the unique ways in which you can make money. Like, for example, the last piece you were speaking to here around emailing your list and allowing your list to kind of support you in that desire to make a salary, and then from that allowing that experience to deepen you into um, becoming the person that is like the next iteration, right? Of like who you become. You know, you become this person who is able to um, offer guidance for people that they are willing to happily invest in, you know? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also another curiosity that's kind of coming up for me, which is around how you held your any experiences of inner child activation, especially when your bank account hits zero, for example, right? And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to hear your take on this is because when you and I were in a mentorship container, something that um, I realized after we were done with that container was how much you had helped me kind of be with my inner child in a way that's really sweet and really healing and supportive, and really kind of being present with my inner child's experience. And so it feels to me like that's something that you've embodied in some ways. I'm also thinking about your, I believe it's South Node in Cancer, right? And your North
Yeah.
Node in Capricorn, is that right?
Yes. Um, Oh, the inner child, that can be such a sweet, um, like sweet exploration. And it's really tender.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, I mean, I think by the time I started to really get adept or devoted to doing that kind of thing, it seemed like the most cringe, like, why would I want to do, or like, I don't even know how to talk to her kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's this book Unblocked by Margaret Lynch,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes through the different, not all of the chakras, but the chakras basically from the heart down.
Mm-hmm.
And for the sacral, there's all these teachings about basically like this inner child that wants to be really big, that has these big ideas or these outbursts, wants to touch the hot stove, and keeps getting feedback from life of like, no, like settle down and whatnot. And there was an image, the man, it was like, I guess, co written at this point by a husband and wife, but this man was talking about how his kid opened the front door one day and just yelled out with arms outstretched, "I'm here." And that he looked and he was like, "Who is my kid talking to?" And that there was actually no one there. It was just this open-ended proclamation of like, "I exist," and being in this like joy and like arms outstretched of that.
Mm-hmm.
And how he like teared up and was like, "This is just such a teaching or a metaphor about like this kind of spirit inside that is really innocent and just happy to exist and be itself in its fullness."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the inner child, there's different personality traits that everyone's inner child has, but there's a really kind of raw expression of who we are that that's one of the most vulnerable things for us. So any kind of discouragement that we receive or lack of validation that we receive,
Mm-hmm.
it can be too much for a child's nervous system to actually hold the pain of that. And so there's just like a splitting or a fracturing that happens.
Yeah.
And then we kind of spend the rest of our lives trying to come back to that part. And we don't
Mm.
always know that we can just find it within. It's like we're looking for it on the outside. We're looking for it by becoming the best, most amazing, most spectacular person ever and having everyone like us and think we're the best. Like it just like wants that, you know?
Uh-huh. So
And it's
relatable.
like, right?
Yeah.
And it's sweet because that part of us, I think, actually gets to have those things, but it's not through performance and impressing the world per se. And like, you can
Mm-hmm.
still be a performer and you can still be impressive, but like the the place it's coming from, like, there's a certain radiant internal joy that's possible, and it doesn't need others to validate it. In fact, it actually gets other people to join the party or join the experience. It's like a a generator itself of that energy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
What do you feel about that and like the inner child, your experiences with it?
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. I feel like for me, the inner child holds such wisdom and medicine because um, there's something about allowing myself to embrace my inner child that has really opened up a dimension of expressiveness that for me actually has a much more profound impact in our lives. There's something about allowing the inner child, right, to be seen and to take space within our lives that especially through our mentorship, I learned not to infantilize my inner child. Like my inner child, not as this part of me that needs to be fixed or healed or even kind of tempered down, but rather to be allowed in the table, right, with the other adults. Because what I've noticed is allowing my inner child to shine through different conflicts or situations or difficulties has allowed my inner child to help me reorganize my reality. It's shifted my relationship with my partner. It's shifted my relationship with my parents. It's actually released some friendships from my life. That some people who are not able to see me and hold me in that way, what I learned is that when when you are not able to see someone through their inner child activation, there's a bit of a mismatch there in terms of resonance, right? And I think part of at least for me personally, part of um, having deep and meaningful friendships is being able to kind of walk each other through those moments of activation. And when someone is kind of activated in their inner child, and your first immediate response is to kind of blame them or shame them, there's, I think, some pedestal that's actually happening there, because there's an assumption underneath that irritation that this person's supposed to have it together, right? And I've learned through allowing my inner child to kind of be present in the room that, first of all, my inner child doesn't have to be, it's not actually that scary. Like, I'm not trashing the house, I'm not like burning down the house, right? I'm not projecting left and right. I'm just irritated. I'm just angry, right? And there was actually a meme I was reading earlier this week that says basically that you can be regulated and angry at the same time, right? And so that's kind of
Yeah.
what I'm talking about here, that I think allowing my inner child to be witnessed by me first and foremost allows me
Mhm.
to have some of these activations, but to trust that some of these activations are actually leading me into some sort of wisdom, right? And to use the example of my relationship with my partner, what I've learned is that allowing my inner child to be present helps us within that relationship to take each other off the pedestal, right? That there's a certain way in which, even though my partner and I have been together for some time, there are sets of assumptions in my brain and in their brain around what it means to be a good partner, right? And sometimes the only way to really deconstruct that is for that inner child to come up, and to start rearranging things a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, some of what I'm hearing in that is like the holding of our inner child, right? Like when we have this relationship and approval and we're caring for that part, we can actually let others see us there, but
Mm,
we're not making them responsible for it.
yes.
It's like they just can it's like that part of us is a little bit more raw and unfiltered and is okay making like a little scene, uh,
Mm,
instead of pretending, that
mm-hmm.
everything's fine when it's not. It's like the part of us that's gonna really express,
Yeah.
and how, that brings a dynamism and play into
Mm-hmm.
connections,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's something, when people do that unconsciously, when their, like, child is running the show and they're kind of being more manipulative with it, they tend to, one, they're not holding their inner child, but other people aren't either, or
Mm-hmm.
other people are, and it gets weird.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so there's just a way of being in approval of that part of ourselves, but also being able to be like vitalized and allow, that aspect. And a lot of like children, like the inner child is fun. There's a
Mm-hmm.
very joyful, like creative, almost like non conditioned honest part of, and it's like really fun when it's play, but
Mm,
also like sometimes we're hurt, sometimes we're
mm-hmm.
scared,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we're mad, and like those things, um like having an approval for that goes a long way, so that
Mm-hmm.
we're not like playing all these games around it, being manipulative or trying to make things different so that we're okay in some kind of way. Like it just comes down to being able to have empathy for what we're
Yeah.
feeling, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Yeah, I'm really grateful you brought in that nuance, because I do feel like there's a difference between just letting the inner child completely run the show, right? And allowing it to be present in the room with us, right? Because to me, the latter has more to do with accessing authentic expression of our emotions through the lens of our inner child, and through the lens of I'm human. I can be pissed, right? I can be activated. Like I can't. I don't think it's honest for any of us to pretend that as adults we're able to be constantly in this like really even temperament all the time. And I think there's
No.
something very violent actually about expecting that out of our reality, right? That we're all supposed to like have our shit together and we're all supposed to relate from this very deeply mature place, where we never project onto one another. Like it's never, that's not reality, right? And also at the same time, what you're
Yeah. And it
speaking
can
to,
be if you keep people at a distance.
true, true,
Yeah.
yes. Yes. That's actually such a good point. Yeah, I feel like for a long time, that's also how I kind of run a lot of my interactions, just filtering out interactions from the perspective of like, okay, we are playing a very distinct role here and we're not going to get out of that role, right? And, to kind of tie it back to money, I feel like there is kind of a connection here between um, a more raw and authentic expression of who we are on an emotional level and also um, allowing more emergent and creative ways to interact with reality that can bring in abundant flow for us, right?
Yeah. I'm wondering, it must be so personal just in terms of what people experienced around resources as a kid, and
Yeah.
that being kind of the conditioning and the thing that we're working with. And yeah, I think that thing I had with magazines or whenever I wanted something, like I just wanted to be able to have it,
Hmm.
and like that kind of quality, I think is the thing that people have attempted to shame me for, of
Mm.
like, Sabrina likes her luxuries or whatever, like this sense that I wasn't like trying to have as little as possible and being like a good person in that way, the way that I'm
Mm.
like interested in wealth and whatnot, and like to spend on nice things. Like that's definitely a place people could go to try to like shame me.
Yeah.
And there's been times where I was more or less like susceptible to that, but then I'm also very encouraging of friends, and I can guide people to various extents around like how they can create more wealth for themselves, and I'm like
Mm.
really supportive of that quality in other people. It's not to say without discernment, like I'm not for things like being totally frivolous or like
Mm.
irreverent about it, but I
Mhm.
don't think it's wrong to like have something that's just for pleasure or just for fun.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe thinking back to like the inner child in terms of what was a place, what were the places where we were resourced that are just really easy for us now because we don't have
Mm.
any trauma around it,
Mhm.
versus where did we want some resource, a type of resource that we weren't allowed to have or that we were told like wasn't for us or something like that,
Yeah.
and how that friction is going to create um, a limitation later on in life or a place to have a breakthrough,
Mhm.
because those things that really actually trigger us and really bothered us in our upbringing, like there's friction there because it's touching something, it's
Mm.
touching what our values or desires are. There's maybe some things that my parents like said I couldn't have that like I don't even remember and I don't care about because it didn't touch a spot where I was like, but I want to have it. It just was
Mhm.
like mellow and didn't matter. But if
Mhm.
there's any kind of charge or friction around it, like that's where the juice is for transformation.
Mm.
And I think everyone has that in childhood. Like being a kid is, we don't have that much power as
Mhm.
children
Yeah.
in the sense of like how life goes around us. Like we're
Mm.
really beholden to a lot of factors that are beyond us. And kids get upset about those conditions. And that's really good feedback of like what was out of resonance
Mm.
with our desire nature. And
Yeah.
then that can be like a shadow work kind of pathway to like, what did I really want as a kid that I was eventually told I wasn't supposed to want, or I was like
Mm.
discouraged for wanting, and then I developed shame or this stuff around it.
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of those things actually hold a lot of emotional charge, like
Mm.
deep emotional charge for people. And to go into those spaces and really love ourselves there and forgive our desire and forgive ourselves and like even be generous with that part of ourselves is like deep alchemy that happens through inner child work.
Mm. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to hear you share a little bit about what's currently on your mind with regards to money, inner child, power through the lens of the fixed signs? I know that you've been in communion with the fixed signs for quite a number of years now. I feel like the first time
Yeah.
I heard you talking about it was maybe like 2020.
It
Yeah,
was even
and
before that. It was on the EA Zoom channel.
wow.
Yeah, I gave a talk like a long time ago about money through the fixed signs.
Yeah, yeah.
And honestly, after the whole time I gave the talk, my nerves hurt and I had like a headache. And I like told Linda Johnson after, like, was that okay? Like, and she's like, it was amazing. And I was like, I feel really uncomfortable. And it was just
Mm,
because I was hitting a nerve for myself
mhm, mhm,
in talking about it. So,
mhm.
um, yeah, currently with like, I can just go through the fixed signs and give like a quick outline of kind of how money relates to all of them.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
Taurus, obviously, resources and money, but also things like our self esteem and
Mm,
self worth. And that definitely can tie to our sense of what we believe we have or what we have, right? So, like hard, like material resources, as well as like personal assets that we
mhm,
feel are worthy,
mm,
right? As like the Taurus experience. Um, Taurus also relates to receptivity and scarcity versus abundance.
mhm,
And then we get to Leo, and it's all about inner child and play, and would bring out the side of money that's a little bit more about gambling and expenditures, and I kind of think about the Leo Taurus as like the the romance of scarcity and the romance of abundance, where it's like you could be like in poverty and in love, and like it's really romantic how you like save up all your coins together and like buy it. Like you could, I have moments where I was like with a partner and we both were like kind of broke and we like made it fun. Like you
mhm,
can do that. Or it could be like the light, is gone. Like
mm.
there's no Leo joy here. We don't have any money, and like there's sadness across the whole land, like
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Mhm,
Um, but yeah, it's the drama and like the play around Taurus themes.
mhm,
And then we get to Scorpio and it gets the plot thickens. It's like about resource exchange, and it's about like at a high level energy exchanges that have a lot of mutual enhancement, like a
mm,
symbiotic quality to them.
mhm,
At a lower level, it's more of a win lose situation, lose lose situations, toxic bonds, addictions.
mm,
Um, yeah, it can relate to debt,
mhm,
right? And so I think about the Taurus Scorpio experience. If we just hold a basic frame of compassion that we're all organisms that need energy to live.
mm,
And so
mhm.
all of us are like merging with oxygen, merging with food, need shelter. Like we all have to do things to live.
Yeah.
And when people are really collapsed in that, there's maybe more of a sense of like things have to be taken. Like I got to get mine versus like the vulnerability of like being in service and exchange.
Mm,
And of course, we can take in the factors and maybe it brings us more to Aquarius in terms of what the matrix is, what the social conditions are,
mm,
what the systems are in the culture, in the paradigm that we're in that um, create a kind of collective sense of resource. But then inwardly, Aquarius would also be our own nervous system. And so even just thinking about like when you spend on certain things or spend a certain amount of money, when does that just have an equal, easy keel in your nervous system versus when is it charged?
mm,
And how, like, a lot of uh, abundance work or like being able to spend and receive money or spend and receive energy is like, can it go through your nervous system?
mm,
And it doesn't have to all be just like flatlined chill, like Taurian, it could be like the turn on of like a big purchase or like
mm,
the turn on of receiving a big amount of money. Like things
mhm,
that have more charge don't have to be turned into something basic. It could be like, can you hold the excitement?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, that's kind of a quick overview of how I think all the fixed signs relate to money. Um, yeah, do you want to add anything to that?
What's alive for me hearing you talk about it this time is also thinking about Aquarius and Leo axis. There's something there around the vulnerability of admitting to acknowledging the power of our desire to have money, which money is also really interesting, right? Because from an Aquarian perspective, money is a currency, it's a symbol that we now use to signify a lot of things, right? And so, even just kind of in the breaking down of like, you know, I'm thinking now, for example, if I'm looking at me purchasing a course, right? Let's say like, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000. That has a different connotation in terms of what I believe it means about me as a person versus purchasing um I'm trying to think of like maybe an appliance, right, for like $4,000, like a new fridge for $4,000. I don't know how fridges go this days, like what the market rate is, but let's just say, a new fridge, right? Or like a new sofa. Um, because and then there's something about how even like on a psychological level, right? When, this is something that you and I have talked about. When I think about, for example, charging a certain amount for a particular offering, or maybe having a mental goal of, I wish that this offering can make me this amount of money, there's stories underneath it, right? And that story is sometimes, I think about how part of holding the nervous system activation that can come from that is also really unraveling and investigating what those stories mean to us, right, on a more kind of mental level. um, and then there's also kind of this leonine aspect then of how willing am I in how willing am I to be seen by other people as wanting to go after the thing, right? I'm really thinking about the imagery of the lion here chasing after its prey, right? Or like hunting for its next meal. And how sometimes I think, even in considering communities of mystical practitioners or astrologers, when I see someone sharing on Instagram like their offering, judgment can come up, right? Or something I've heard time and time again from students and um, clients is their fear of actually putting out that offer, right? Of saying, like, hey, I have something that I've been working on, something that means a lot to me. I think this can be of service to you as well. And here's the price tag. Like, that can bring up a lot,
Oof.
you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that's pinging for me. Like, even just to that last point, I have Sun and Aries in the second house. So I already referenced that. But one of the assets that I could have in that sense is confidence in myself.
Mm,
And I had a experience like 2 years ago that really shook my confidence, not about my work, but just a personal life thing. But I, from that, stopped really being that interested in taking selfies or just like kind of showing the internet what I was up to. And
mm,
when I looked back on it, I'm like, that kind of cost me. Like, I got
mm,
really serious about like my work for the sake of my work. Like, I wasn't interested in like talking about how great it was.
mm,
So I had less juice to like market myself. And there's something about like, to market oneself is extremely vulnerable. You have to have confidence about it. Or you need to also resource yourself with reflections from people that inspire you to have confidence about yourself. You have to cultivate the thing that you're offering.
mm,
And yeah, the like a Leo Aquarius, just being seen in the community, being seen in the world, and how ultimately like all of us, like we all have to be in the system. Like, and
mm-hmm.
I don't mean the man, the system, but I mean like the system of life. Like we're
Yeah.
all literally exchanging energy on this planet to survive. And it's not something you really opt out of. Like we're already
Mm-hmm.
doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, how much joy can you bring to it? How authentic can it be versus where is it this like trauma bond where it's like this terrible kind of thing?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this, Sabrina. Recently, I've been thinking about how, and this is something that's rooted in my exploration of energetic tools as well, right? And the nervous system, where oftentimes our energy body is able to pick up on particular frequencies that are present, but that the act of interpreting it through the mind can sometimes lead us astray. So, for example, when I was launching one of my offerings, I could feel something in the energetics of like some of my friends or like people that I know or people for whom I know this would be a good offering. But for some reason, there's kind of something there. I don't know what it is, right? But I can feel something there. And this was a lot for me to hold. And it's interesting because once my offering is done, and I actually end up talking to some of these people from whom I felt that mm, frequency with, what I learned later was that they were seriously considering taking the offering, but they were just aware that they didn't have the capacity for it in that moment in their life. And so it's interesting because I felt something, and then my brain interpreted it as, oh, this person doesn't like me anymore, or this person is trying to avoid me, right? Or this person thinks I'm embarrassing. And later on, I just found out, oh, actually, this person wanted to take it but maybe didn't have the resources or didn't have the time for it, right? Which is so interesting because our minds make up all these stories about what we're actually picking up on a more subtle frequency level. Hmm.
That's a great example of part of why entrepreneurship is really intense emotionally. Like,
Yeah.
I love it and I don't want to be doing anything else, but it works you to the bone, like at different
Mm.
times,
Hmm.
like it takes you through these emotional cycles. And there's like a medicine that gets carved from those experiences.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, what you shared, like sensing people's reactions and sitting with the basically the vulnerability of putting your wares out for sale and having people look at it and feeling their perception of it and not knowing what you're reading in terms of the signal that they're giving. And
Mm.
how what that kind of calls to mind for me is how there's kind of just a humility of the service in all
Hmm.
of this where it's
Hmm.
like what offering doesn't it's not there to like make us feel good about ourselves or to validate ourselves. Like that can sometimes happen in some sense, but it's like there's a real humility and almost like impersonal quality of it. And at the same time,
Mm.
it's so personal because it is you and it is your brand. And
Hmm.
yet, like, it's something that we're channeling.
Yeah.
And it's not even our business who's interested in it and who isn't,
Hmm.
even though it feels like so personal.
Hmm.
I think this is fascinating to consider. I've noticed this for people, just like clients and myself, friends, that sometimes people have like a lot of ease in romantic partnership,
Mm.
and entrepreneurship is like so challenging on their nervous system versus
Yes.
people that are great at entrepreneurship and like so like have all this trouble with romance. And then of course the magic of people that do both
Uh-huh.
and they're just like wildly like inspired, where it's like
Mm.
their relationships and their like professional like service, all of that like get into this loop
Yeah.
of like upward expansion,
Yeah.
or cycles and whatnot, like
Hmm.
still. But yeah, that there's just different things that make our nervous system feel crazy. And it might be going on a date and like meeting new people, or it might be like having people see us talk about what we do on social media or like putting something on sale. Like those are all potentially edgy experiences, and a lot
Mhm.
of being able to make it farther as an entrepreneur, make it farther with this kind of like wealth side of entrepreneurship is just expanding the nervous system in the places that were not resourced at a nervous system level.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm really inspired by the things that you're saying right now because it's making me think about the more scorpionic aspect to this. I think what you were speaking to is kind of more of this close range merging, right? Or kind of getting into each other's skin versus like more of the wider, like casting a wider net, right? If we think about it in human design language, it's like the fourth line process versus the fifth line process. And I think there's something about our level of being able to hold our impact on other people, right? Which is to me so scorpionic. Like this is really like on the Scorpio Taurus axis, right? That can really come into play when it comes to us making offerings to the wider community versus us creating maybe or giving specific suggestions to our partner, you know, in a one-on-one setting, right? Because um, it's intense in different ways. Like I was noticing, for example, Sabrina, maybe about a month ago, I was kind of going through a dark night of the soul, and I had a lot of thoughts about it, and I had a lot of very kind of incisive insights that came through from being in that space, right? Like being more in that like death spiral, like metaphorically, archetypally. And something I realized about my specific psyche structure at that time was it was a lot easier for me to go into threads or to go to Instagram to share something or to create a podcast about it rather than to talk to a friend about the kind of difficulty I'm moving through. Because when I talk to a friend, I can see the impact of my share on them immediately. And there was a part of my nervous system or a part of my emotional landscape that just isn't available for that kind of feedback at the moment, you know. But I don't mind universalizing it and sharing it with Instagram because that doesn't feel as personal to me, you know. Like being more unhinged on my stories didn't feel so scary to my nervous system, you know. Whereas coming to a close friend and saying like I'm really struggling right now, you know, I'm really, I don't know what I need, I don't know what I need help with, but I'm really struggling is really kind of a, s- a level of vulnerability that I wasn't comfortable with. Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting, like the just getting to know that part of ourselves and seeing what we need at a certain point in the process. And even
Mm.
just like for me, it's been stressful at times when those parts were not integrated. Like I felt
Mm.
like I would have these times um, where I'd be like on calls with people who were considering taking my programs, and they, one on one, we're like having a call about it. And they're like, I've been following you for years. I love your work. And like, there's this amount of gravity and like respect. And
Mm.
then I would like go on a date with someone from an app and just be like, what the fuck? Like, why do
Yeah.
I feel like such a dumb bitch? And like, that actually, I didn't understand the game as well
Mm.
of romance and dating as well as I understood the
Mhm.
game of entrepreneurship. And then I
Mm.
started to just seek answers to the dating thing, and like things were coming into my field. I started meeting couples that had met on Tinder, and like I just kept hearing things about online dating and like different conversations. Something shifted for me where I understood the energetic of how to know what I really desire and pursue the kind of like romantic dating field with that level of clarity and call
Mm.
in
Mhm.
someone who like shows up in a way that I really want to receive,
Yes.
And it's like
Mhm.
similar where it's like I haven't really had that struggle in, my people receiving my work and writing. I pretty frequently have people writing to me about my impact on them or like people that want to work with me. And I'm not just like you know, out like spouting ideas and being like, where are the people that want to listen to me or whatever? Like it, it's like just noticing like when we have a place that is really well mapped and we have ease
Mm.
there, how it might
Mhm.
point to another part of life at some juncture where we want to integrate those things. And it's interesting that specific one about like casting a net versus intimacy. Like, I love the net casting, and that has been my preference for a while in some sense, but then I had certain things occur in my, like, personal life that I really wanted to cast a net and talk about, but because of, like I was like, "I can't this time, I, like, can't talk about it,
Mhm.
it's too personal," and
Mhm.
that really kind of put me into a situation where I had to, like, talk about it at a personal level instead of a net level,
Mm.
even though I really liked honestly, I felt like talking to the universe, like talking to the internet about my process was like an Aquarian way. It like lightened the load. It was like I was sharing the alchemy with the masses. And that's like so different
Definitely.
than talking to one person who either can hold me and has like agreed to in that moment, or someone who like cracks before me and doesn't want to hold me because I'm too
Mm.
intense or what I've brought to
Yeah.
them is too much
Right.
or it triggers them individually,
Right. Right.
versus like actually feeling really held and supported by one person and being
Mm.
like, wow, and having like an opening and a healing about it. Like,
Mhm.
so different texture of the experience.
Totally, totally. There's an anonymity, I think, to kind of putting out the web, right? That um, you can trust. I remember early on in kind of sharing more, astrological insights on Instagram, something that I did that I don't do super religiously anymore now, but I used to, was I had this pact with Mercury where the pact was I'm just going to express and you're going to deliver this to the people who needed it at the moment. And you're going to hide it from the people who didn't need it. And I found that that worked really well for me because I
It's such
had
a
this,
Mercury and Pisces thing. I
I
was like,
know.
people that it's not for don't even know what the fuck we're saying.
Yeah, they don't. They don't. And it kind of just like flies by people's heads. And I've even used this in terms of clearing out my email list as well. Like recently, I've been sending out more newsletters, which at first felt edgy to me because that wasn't a medium that I was used to communicating in. But I started to feel this discrepancy because I would only send out newsletters when I had an offering that I wanted to sell people. And that didn't feel right. Like it kind of felt a little disrespectful towards that particular format. So then I wanted to have more of engagement and sharing my insights there and also learning to put my thoughts into words, into written words. And at the beginning, I really had to come back to that practice of being like, okay, Mercury, you're going to show this to the right people. The wrong people are going to read the first three sentences and they're going to be like, okay, food delivery is here. Or my boss called me, and they just like abandoned it. And I think um, there's something about that devotional practice that is really lovely. And I've been thinking about how for someone like me, for whom more intimate connections with friends, right, that are more kind of on an even level where there is no pedestal, there is no role to play, has historically been a lot harder, how that actually has been helpful too. Like giving myself permission to set an intention before, having calls where I connect to a peer, right? Or literally like creating the container, getting very clear about like this is the kind of interaction I am desiring to have with this person in this moment,
There's a
which is
lot of
similar to what you're saying about dating too, with that clarity.
it feels like frequency magic, like just
Hmm.
basically like the Leo like emanating quality, but the Aquarius like frequency and how
Yes.
like creative expression isn't just about the concrete thing that we've said or made, it's the energy that people feel from it. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we can completely control what people feel from our energy. They're going to have their own response to it, but we
Hmm.
can be emitting a frequency. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's a large part of the fixed signs in some sense too, because there's also like um, finding our own resonance with Taurus and
Mm-hmm.
like clearing out the gunk with Scorpio. Cause it's like you could be saying a bunch of nice things to someone, but underneath the surface, actually like really resent them. And they're going to feel that emitting from your frequency. And I
Totally.
think it goes the same with entrepreneurship stuff, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
if you're having a lot of self doubt about the thing that you're selling, people can
Mm-hmm.
pick up on that. And it's like you have to basically alchemize your self doubt, and that feeds your medicine too. But it's like, it's just another part of the responsibility that comes into
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's the medium that kind of confronts that. But it would be the same for like a performer
Mm-hmm.
where they get on stage and it's like they have to hold the frequency. If they falter in it and get like scared and fumble, the audience is going to maybe start to feel insecure for them or start to feel uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I mean, I'm going off on a tangent because I could also imagine someone faltering during a like live transmission performance and still holding the audience and the tension
Mm-hmm.
of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like an embodiment part of that with Taurus, but all of that is just me rambling at this point because with the fixed signs, I can definitely do that. So,
I think that's beautiful though, and it's reminding me of one of my partner's favorite Lady Gaga performance was the Super Bowl performance. And it's so fabulous. I don't know if you've ever seen that specific performance, but it's so
from
like
like
larger than life.
2016-ish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's a while back. Yeah. It's so like fabulous and larger than life. And because he watched it and showed it to me so many times, I started to see, because like it's a performance, right? And it's done by a human being. And so I started to see the little imperfections in the performance, and it was so inspiring and such a masterclass to watch her navigate that, because you can tell that, with her um, exacting standards, I feel like you can tell when she can tell when she's not like on the spot. Like there was even this one moment, before I think maybe it turned into Bad Romance where the band was a little bit off. Like you can hear it audibly, the band was a little bit off and it was a live performance, but she picked it back up within like a couple seconds. And it's incredible because I think what she was really embodying there was the sense of coherence and confidence, and also being so tuned into the frequency that she wants to emanate, and so I think someone who maybe isn't a performer wouldn't even be able to pick it up because she just kind of let it flow through her, right? And it's part of life that something's not always going to be perfect. And
Yeah.
it's, the embodiment of the frequency itself is never going to be spot on. Like it's always going to be slightly imperfect. Mm-hmm.
I love that you bring that up because I think a lot of this actually like about being able to be human. Uh,
Mm.
not
Mm-hmm.
feeling like we have to be perfect and not show we're angry or hurt.
Yeah.
And even like in terms of being like a public figure, being visible, that it's like you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be ready like to do that. You just have
Yeah.
to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that yeah, it takes the pressure off, but it's vulnerable. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's literally impossible to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think I was even realizing that, yeah, there's the frequency part about people picking up lack of confidence, but I've also had a lot of weeks writing weekly forecasts where I was like, oh, this sucks. And I like publish it. And then people love it anyway. And I'm like, no one
Yeah.
felt that I judged it. And I just like let myself get out of the way, like
Yeah.
almost acknowledging that we can have parts of self and we don't have to
Mm.
listen to every stray judgment or thought.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've found that some of the most potent transmissions that came through the weekly contemplations I do on this podcast have been the ones that I don't feel totally locked in with. Some of the ones that I was like, this is like the best thing I've ever done. Like there was no response around it, and maybe people really enjoyed it and maybe people really benefited from it. But I think there's something about even when we falter, right? Or maybe perhaps because we falter, people can find their own way into the material, and into the frequency, right? And our imperfection then kind of makes space for other people to see themselves within the
Yeah.
transmission. Mm-hmm.
Here's an edgy one. I realized recently that humiliation has like an erotic energy to it, which obviously like you can have like a humiliation kink or whatever. But like sometimes I do something that I'm really embarrassed about. And I
Mm,
noticed that when I was living in a smaller version of myself at different times in life, I'm not making those mistakes. I'm like
mm,
preventing myself from those mistakes. I'm preventing myself from looking like a fool.
yeah.
And I started to even see it on TV shows, like when a character that's like a little bit unhinged just has like a total face palm, like so embarrassing moment. I was like, at
Mm,
least they're living. Like at least they put it on the line, you know? Like I would like
mm,
admire it.
yeah.
And now these days, sometimes I do something, say something, and afterwards I'm like so embarrassed. And not just like
Mm,
lightly embarrassed, but like hot, like nervous system agitated,
yeah.
humiliated.
Right.
And I started to notice that like that could be such a shameful experience or like a punisher part would come up. And then I started to notice that it was actually just pure life force energy, that it was like erotic. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, I'm like so embarrassed. That was so cringe. And I would just like let the sensation in. I would like let it open me and then I would move on.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really interesting of like every time, not every time now, but like a lot of times on psychedelics, I'll have one moment of the trip where I'm like, I can't believe I like show up in public and I'm like this person that gives advice in public. Like, what the fuck? And I'm like, so just like mortified that that's who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why do I just have that peak moment of embarrassment and then like, it wears off.
Mm,
And the next day I'm like writing a forecast again.
mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, and so I think actually, like, for people that want to expand their nervous system capacity to be visible, it's like, I think there's something embarrassing about being seen. Like, it's just
Mm,
like if you come down to like everyone's imperfect and like some
mhm,
imperfect person is just gonna full on display everything about themselves like in public under the full light, like there is like a cringe to it
mhm.
that
Yeah.
you can just like let in and enjoy and like
Mhm,
be okay with, as opposed to thinking that that sensation of like, ooh, that was embarrassing means that you should crawl into a ball and like go hide forever. Like it's just sensation, and it's sensation that you wouldn't have to feel if you were hidden.
mm,
It's a type of sensation that comes from being in the spotlight.
mm. I love that you brought this in, Sabrina, because it's actually reminding me of my day job and how some of the most impactful, powerful interaction and or redirection that happens in meetings in my day job, which is a corporate job, is when people break out of that script. Actually, it's not about totally always following the rules, but to be seen more in their conviction, or to be seen in ways that, to be totally mm, honest with you, isn't super aligned with like what one would think of as like professionalism, within a corporate setting, right? But I think the most impactful performers, even in conventional settings, I imagine, academia or the corporate world, are people who take chances, and I think the more we allow ourselves to take those chances, the more we will make mistakes. And from the experience of making mistakes, the more we kind of develop this intuitive spidey sense of when it's appropriate for us to be in that space and when it's not. Hmm.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
I
then to
know in the
also be with the mistake, like sometimes you just made an honest mistake, right? And that's okay. You can apologize afterwards. How was that, right?
Right. No, as soon as the nodes, like was doing this experiment with the North Node in Aries, I was like
Hmm.
channeling Rahu in Aries, which was like insane. But I was like basically doing this thing where I would listen to my impulses more than I was previously letting myself.
Hmm.
And sometimes that led me to experiences that were really cool, but sometimes it led me to like just mistakes. And I would be like on the floor in like cringe and shame. And then I was realizing, like, oh, this is literally just me thawing out from
Mm.
parts of myself that were like too conservative, too risk averse.
Yeah.
And now I just like entered the rink and I'm like down for the count and like
Mm-hmm.
whatever, like I'll get back up kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But
Mm-hmm.
it felt so, yeah, intense. And I feel like this all is looping back to still like our money and fixed Stein stuff, because if we want to stabilize a new transformation or a new kind of abundance, we basically just have to be able to handle more,
Mm-hmm.
handle things that are personally edgy for us,
Yeah.
and then also clear, like do the kind of scorpionic clearing work too, of like not
Mm.
holding stuff. Like someone could be in a really toxic relationship or like have an addiction and they're trying to like manifest wealth. And it's like that path might ask them to make the sacrifice of letting go of some of their addictions
Mm.
to make space for what they're really calling in.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like a little bit of both of like, and once we clear an addiction, then all that energy frees up and it's really vulnerable just to be with that energy. That's why people sunk it into an addiction in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So it like literally all comes down to like capacity in some
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful segue to talking about Pluto, I feel like, because as you were speaking, I'm sensing into how one of the keywords I would associate with Scorpio, and especially, from the Plutonic side of Scorpio, is redemption, right? And yeah, just finding ways to essentially,
Wait, what do you mean by redemption?
hmm, in this moment, it feels to my system like almost this thorough uh pressing the reset button experience energetically, right? Of like, to kind of tie this back to humiliation, to me, redemption has to do with giving yourself space to make a really honest mistake and then be thoroughly humiliated by that experience, right? And I don't just mean humiliated in a modern sense, but to allow that experience to inspire humility to bring you closer to the ground, to kind of um yeah, bring us back to where we came from, right? The earth as really, the underground as really where we came from. Everything kind of gets decomposed and nourished within the underground. And then from that space, allowing ourselves to begin again, right? To approach something from the perspective of the fool, the beginner's mind. I think there's a process that when we get deeper into some of these scorpionic themes, we yield to, we surrender to having that kind of process, right? And trusting that we can come out of it the other side with some deeper wisdom. Hmm. That's a very long-winded definition of redemption, but
No, yeah, that's beautiful.
hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so what about Pluto?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear about your current relationship with Pluto. I know that you have another round of the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive coming up. And so I'm just wanting to hear what's been on your mind with regards to Pluto and power, and how this practice of, tuning into evolutionary astrology can help with that and can help open up a framework to being able to start engaging some of these experiences, right? Hmm.
Yeah, wow. So evolutionary astrology intensive, I've been teaching it since I think like late 2017.
Mm.
And it keeps getting deeper. And what I've noticed is that, um, I'm teaching a Pluto based astrology, I'm teaching a language of astrology, and I'm always having an experience with Pluto in my personal life. Pluto aspects almost everything in my chart except for like Mars,
Mm.
like,
Wow.
and my sun.
Hmm.
It aspects everything else, including my ascendant.
That's wild.
So I'm pretty Plutonic. And for me, that, you know, maybe I could be described by some people as like intense. I do think I make like intense eye contact that really like
Mm.
surprises people.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm not like goth or like macabre or anything, like what it is in my life is actually just the amount of like transformation and metamorphosis that I go through and like how I
Mm.
encounter limitations or things
Hmm.
that feel like impossible blocks
Yeah.
and somehow move past them.
Mm.
And just how that happens in terms of like life story arcs or just like energetic patterns or something like that. So I feel like every time I teach the intensive, it's kind of like the more that I've been teaching it, it's almost like I feel like with Pluto, I'm like, do you still like, are you still okay with me teaching you?
Mm.
Like,
Hmm.
because I've been teaching you for a long time. Like,
Hmm.
I don't want to just milk Pluto.
Hmm.
So I think like there's this conversation between Pluto and I of just like, are we good? And I feel like when I feel into it and really sit with that question of like, is Pluto okay? That I'm like focusing on them all the time, and
Hmm.
like teaching them consistently.
Mm.
And I like feel into it and like there's love there. I am
Mm.
like deeply supported by Pluto, I feel like.
Mhm.
And um I think that my relationship with Pluto has become more easeful even because there were spots where I was maybe more stubborn or more willfully resistant to certain realities in myself or in life. And so the lessons had to be harsher.
Mm.
But like now that I feel like I've made a lot of breakthrough in certain parts of myself, like things have gotten more honeyed and like magical and like deep.
Mhm.
And so this time, one of the big experiences I had with Pluto was just being tired of like using my voice. I was like tired of creating, I was tired of selling, I was tired of talking. I was so tired that I like broke out into tears about it. Of just
Mm.
like I'm exhausted. Like I don't know if I even want to go anymore. And after that layer came off, I felt like my throat channel like get connected to like an infinite depth below me. And I felt like this, like you can be a channel. Like you don't have to be the one talking all the time. Like you don't have to carry all this weight. Like, what if you trust yourself deeper so that the frequency from which you move and talk feels more resource to you?
Mm.
Um, and so I went through this process basically of like having these, this was all really internal. I wasn't even talking about it that much, but just kind of feeling by the end of it, I was watching myself talk and being like, I have the transmission. It's coming through smoother. I worked through some like gunk in my channel or some places where I felt really disconnected.
Mm.
And then this deeper well opened up. And so that to me, like when that was happening, I was like, oh, this is what Pluto and I are doing this time. Whereas like
Mm.
another time, I was like living in Peru and like selling the evolutionary astrology intensive and like having this whole Peruvian experience that was like intense at times. Or another
Mhm.
time I got like COVID right before the intensive. And I was like, that was my Pluto experience. And um, it was just interesting that this time it was actually so subtle and so gentle, even though in that moment of breaking down and feeling exhausted, I
Mm.
really felt this terror of like, what if I just don't even want to go on anymore? Like if I
Mm.
can't talk, if I can't market myself, if I can't be behind what I'm doing, then like I'm gonna have nothing. I'm gonna die. Like that part of me that was like gripping onto what I
Mm.
offer
Yeah.
like had to disintegrate and something deeper had to come through.
Mm.
So I think that that actually is what Pluto is about in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, where it's like
Mhm.
our deepest desire. And it's also all the weird little things that we do to like grip and try to make our desire happen. We try to get it
Mm.
as
Mhm.
opposed to the subtler, more potent magnetism that we can actually have when we fall into deeper relationship with
Mhm.
our nature, with our life force, as opposed to trying to like manipulate the whole thing.
Yeah.
So to teach evolutionary astrology, to teach Pluto, there's so much that we go into before that in terms of like the signs and all the other planets. But we eventually get there and then are able
Mhm.
to go back through the whole thing with that. I mean, the way that I talk about the archetypes, I'm looking for that deep underlying, almost Plutonic vision of it anyway.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm feeling really reverent of the practice, reverent of what it's done in my life. Sometimes my students tell me when they're like signing up that they've followed me for a few years and they've seen my transformation and they're like curious. They're like, what's this thing that you're allied with that's like
Mm.
helping you have these really deep transformations? Like they're
Mhm.
inspired by it.
Mhm.
And so I can just talk about my experience in that way, but everyone who studies evolutionary astrology and like goes into it earnestly, I think can really have their own conversation open up of how the archetypes want to guide them
Mm.
personally, right? Like what the side quest or like the vision quest of the class is going to be individually, depending on what, yeah, how the universe wants to talk to you.
Mhm.
So I feel like my class facilitates that also. Yeah, that's a really long-winded way of answering your question.
I love that answer. Yeah. Am I right that you have Pluto in the ninth house in your natal chart? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's making me reflect on my third house Pluto, actually. And
Yeah.
how,
So
yeah, I think something I've been going through in the past few months is really studying the projection layer around how my communities perceive me. And specifically, not necessarily people like random strangers on the internet, right? Like these are people who know me on some level. They don't live with me, they don't see me 24/7, but they do know some aspects of me. And then, um, what you were speaking to with regards to like the surrender piece in your throat, I was also experiencing that in terms of not necessarily wanting to live up to the projection anymore and just like letting the projection die a little bit and then kind of seeing what emerges out of that because um yeah, there's something really beautiful, I think, that can, for me, it's really about like
like, you can't
connection.
pin me down. Like,
Yeah.
I'm too multidimensional, like, 3rd house, like, I could shapeshift, I'm a genie, I'm, like, so many different things, like, do not
Yes.
try to define me, I'll just meet
Yeah.
underneath your attempt.
That's exactly it. I mean, you read me, and also I think a big piece is around agenda too, because I think that's something I became subtly aware of, that people have these stories about what my agenda is behind my actions that are sometimes maybe speaking to some of my blind spots, but ultimately, like, nobody really knows what's going on. Like nobody really, really knows, right? Like who knows what the truth is? And all that's left then is just people's perceptions, and how much of that do I want to manage? Because I do think that, yeah, the past couple months I've been so aware of noticing how much I try to manage and try to control how other people receive me or kind of subtly correcting their projections. Yeah. Where I'm like, well, I can do that or I don't have to. I can just play too.
Yeah, I feel like part of, teaching Pluto when I first started, I think my pedagogy style was to deflect when things were
Mm,
off. I would just like reflect and redirect students.
yeah.
Over the years, I've gotten more able in my nervous system and in my own self to like actually pin down the spot and be like, hey,
Mm,
and like point out what just happened or like invite
mm,
like a more provocative kind of like coaching moment
yeah. Right.
inside of that. And that's actually part of where my class is by application. And I'm basically vetting for like, is this a good teacher student alliance? Like, do we have a
Mm,
connection?
mhm,
Um, because I don't, my one time readings are always fine. There's never really an issue there. But in terms of doing long term work with people, I'm not interested in working with people that have just like a maybe like a bad faith assumption about me, or want
Mm,
to make my containers something that they want it to be, or want
mhm.
to get their money's worth from me in a particular way. Like
Yeah.
all these kind of dynamics I'm just not game for.
Mhm.
And when they show up in a way with someone who's like actually interested in being a student, there's a way where we can just like talk about what's happening, and there can be like, oh, that's interesting, I was doing that, or like this thing is coming up, as
Mhm.
opposed to when people are so inside of a complex that they
Mhm.
cannot be adjusted there or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So i'm I'm like very gentle, but and kind, but I can be incisive in like what I'm seeing.
Mhm.
um and so projections are interesting because I think inside of teaching, like projections are, there's a teaching tool component to it. And like people can be game to be like, oh, I totally thought that. And that was like my unconscious projection that comes from this. And that can be a learning moment, as opposed to
Mhm.
someone that wants to hold the projection and
Mm.
isn't willing to like see things differently.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of power in holding projections lightly. And there's a lot of wisdom there that can be gleaned when we allow ourselves to be relational about those projections. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I remember I would never assume about a spiritual teacher these days that like when they go home, they only listen to chanting music and that they like their house looks a certain way. I would just like not, but I remember maybe when I was younger
Mm.
and like encountering like some of my first spiritual teachers, I was like so shocked when they were like
Mm.
also very human.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think I don't really encounter that in my students because I think I talk a lot about my personal experience, and I don't present as like some kind of spiritual lifestyle, and it's like I actually
Mm.
listen to like raunchy music, or like it doesn't, there's not that disparity or whatever.
Yeah.
But I just think it's interesting, like projection as a pathway to see like, well, that is plutonic. Like those
Mhm.
assumptions mean something about our unconscious.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Mhm. Mm. That's so rich. Um, would you tell the listeners a little bit more about some ways to work with you? We mentioned the intensive. I'm curious if there are deadlines around that this time around, and also, yeah, other ways that you would like to invite people to work with you.
Yeah, so the intensive, the deadline is for applying is March 29th, and we begin
Hmm.
April 2nd.
Hmm.
Um, I don't have a lot of space at the moment for taking on new mentorship clients, but I do that. So people, maybe you're listening to this in the future, but it's Sabrina at monarchastrology.com if you want to discuss one-to-one mentorship.
Hmm.
I do also open my books. My mailing list is the best way to know about that. I think the intensive is really like the best place to start in terms of working with me, generally. Though sometimes I have people work with me one on one and then take the intensive.
Mm.
But then beyond the intensive, I do offer advanced programs. Currently, those programs have completed and are gestating
Hmm.
anew.
Hmm.
So I'll announce that on my channels when they're done cooking.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, your podcast is Magic of the Spheres, right? And you're also on YouTube, which is where people can um, tune into your transmissions. Yeah.
Yeah. The YouTube Sabrina Monarch. Yeah.
Hmm. Awesome. Anything else that I haven't asked you that I should, Sabrina? Or anything else that you want to name in the space before we formally close out?
Just thank you for having me. And, I love when I tune into your podcast, that feeling of it's like energy work
Mm.
when I hear you speak,
Mm.
and share what's on your mind and what you've been like synthesizing and sorting out and realizing. But I know that you do have a relationship with energy work in
Mhm.
actuality. And
Yeah.
so when you're like talking about your ideas and about astrology, it's like, I don't feel like those things are separate. Like there's
Mhm.
actually the frequency that you're emitting.
Mm.
And yeah, I love how that goes along with like literally healing the spirit,
Mm.
you know? Um, yeah, I really enjoy just like seeing your different facets, your like sweetness, and then also like when you bring the fire and like when you bring out the swords. Um, so yeah, I'm so happy to know you, and get to
Mm.
collaborate with you and muse with you and be in the lyrical Pisces waters together.
Mhm. Oh, likewise. Thank you, Sabrina. I feel always so inspired by your presence, and I think there's such a beautiful quality to how you show up, and the quality of your transmissions always lights something up that I think is really essential and just so mm, timely is kind of the word that's coming to me. I feel like there's something about how you are tuned into a particular, this is maybe projector magic, the way that you're tuned into a very specific frequency in the collective and offer very specific medicine just feels so nourishing, and very, very grateful for your um your mentorship and you walking this path with me. This podcast wouldn't be here without you, I don't think, because really, you're one of the first people to encourage me actually to start this podcast. So, yeah, I feel there's something
Oh
about the
yeah, I take a little
energetics.
pride in
Yeah.
that.
Yes, of course. It's very it's really this kind of mutual symbiotic relationship between generators and projectors that we have. Yeah. I feel like there was a moment where you kind of yeah, really whole beingly encouraged me to explore this, that was really lighting up my yes for this project too. So thank you. Mhm.
Oh, yeah, I'm really touched,
Mm.
honored.
Mhm. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thanks, Jonathan.